Humanity has an enormous capacity for good, for self-sacrifice, generosity, and kindness.
Israel and Franja Rubinek survived the Second World War because a friend hid them from the Nazis on her small farm in the Polish countryside.
These refugees are among the 1,300 that Ottawa has so far agreed to take in.
All over social media, people have been talking about Toronto the Good and the acts of kindness following Monday's horrific van attack.
We also have a shocking capacity for evil, for murderous hate, violence, and killing on a massive scale.
The slow process of only annihilating 30 or 40 Jews was much too slow for him, and that's why he developed the gas chambers in Auschwitz.
Aid workers say they can count anywhere from 40 to 70 bodies floating down Rwanda's main river every hour. Now they're ending up in Africa's largest lake.
On August 6, 1945, I was a 13-year-old in Hiroshima. The bomb had hit.
This is a central paradox in human nature, one that philosophers and theologians through the ages have tried to understand. Well, now it's time for an evolutionary biologist to have a try. Dr. Richard Wrangham has spent his career trying to understand what makes us human. And in a new book, he's exploring why humanity can reach such heights of good and such depths of evil. The book is called The Goodness Paradox, the strange relationship between virtue and violence in human evolution. Dr. Wrangham is a professor of biological anthropology at Harvard University. Hi, welcome back to Quirks and Quarks.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here again.
What got you interested in this paradox of virtue and violence in human beings?
Well, goodness, how can we not be fascinated by it? But I was studying chimpanzees in the team that helped discover for the first time that chimpanzees can show extraordinary violence, deliberately making efforts to find individuals to attack and brutally beat up so that they actually kill them on the spot very often. This raises questions about the similarities in that pattern with humans, and yet at the same time there's this huge contrast because chimps often fight on a sort of casual basis during the day, whereas humans are so incredibly unaggressive in so many ways.
Now, you also mentioned in your book that you studied another species of chimp that people don't hear as much about called bonobos. Tell me about them.
Well, during the 1990s in particular, it was emerging that a different species of chimpanzee, as you say, called the bonobo or the pygmy chimpanzee, which lives in its own exclusive area on the left bank of the Congo River. It looks very much like a regular chimpanzee, but it behaves extraordinarily differently. The really dramatic thing, I think, is that it is much less aggressive than the chimpanzee. And as my colleagues and I started researching the bonobo, what we realized is that the ways in which their bodies differ from chimpanzees is very strikingly similar to the ways that the bodies of domesticated animals differ from those of wild animals. And what it got us to thinking is that the process of domestication, which essentially is a loss of aggressiveness and fear, may occur in the wild just as it can occur in captivity.
So are you saying that bonobos are like domesticated chimps?
It's exactly what we think. They have obviously not been subject to any kind of human interference, so we think of them as being self-domesticated rather than domesticated, and that means that there was an evolutionary process in which they lost their aggressiveness due to a natural phenomenon, and that is that there was selection against individuals who were particularly aggressive. Their faces become shorter, their teeth become smaller, and there is a reduction in the degree of difference between males and females. And all of those things happen in bonobos compared to chimpanzees.
Okay, so let's bring this all back then to us and this duality that we have, where on one hand we're very violent and on the other hand we're very nice to each other.
Yes, I mean, it's so wonderful that on the one hand what has happened is for more than 2,000 years you have people who think about humans observing that in many ways humans behave like domesticated animals. And then a few years ago it was observed that humans in some ways anatomically like domesticated animals. And that goes back to about 300,000 years ago, when for the first time what you start seeing is, in our ancestors, a reduction in the size of the teeth being accompanied by a reduction in the maleness, the loss of brow ridges above the eye, for instance, or the reduction of them, the face becoming narrower, and the face also becoming less protruding. And these are features associated with the domestication, and they suggest that starting around 300,000 years ago, our ancestors started losing their rather primitive primate level of aggressiveness and going in the direction of the calmer, more tolerant, altogether nicer kind of human.
But why does this, what you're calling domestication, lead to more peaceful behavior?
Well, the domestication, of course, is just a symptom of the overall process. And the way I think that we can answer that question is by looking at what happens nowadays in small-scale societies of humans where there is no state intervention, there are no police, there are no prisons. And the question is, what happens if a man becomes exceptionally aggressive or just grows up to be exceptionally aggressive so that he will use his physical dominance to get his way? What, in that case, does a society do? Because the answer to that question will give a signal for how evolution has removed those who tend to be excessively aggressive. And the answer is clear. You know, on the whole, what you get is all sorts of attempts by members of the society, the camp or the small band, to try and cajole the offending individual into being nicer, or he gets teased. Maybe he gets ostracized by everybody being silent, or maybe they just all run away from him. But if he's persistent, he just stays with them, and he'll carry on bullying everybody, taking their meat, taking their women, raping women, just being thoroughly unpleasant. And in the end, the society is forced to do one thing, and that is they use capital punishment. They agree and they kill him. It's all done very clinically, as it were. It might be done with a weapon, it might be done at night, but somehow they arrange to kill him in a way that means that they don't get hurt in any kind of fight. They just do it.
So they're using one kind of aggression to reduce aggression in the society.
Yes, I mean, the insight that has been given to us by biologists and psychologists is that aggression comes in these two different forms. The reactive aggression, where we lose our tempers and flare up and are all thoroughly emotional and get into a fight where we actually might get hurt ourselves. And then the proactive aggression, which is the premeditated, planned, cold type, where we try and ensure that we don't get hurt ourselves. And essentially what seems to be happening is that in humans, over the last 200,000 or 300,000 years, our propensity for reactive aggression has been reduced because our ancestors used proactive aggression to kill those who were most effectively aggressive, those who had the highest propensity for reactive aggression.